Everyone wants a premium handheld without paying a fortune to obtain one, of course. Good materials, a sharp screen, and enough power to basically carry up to a PS1 era should ideally be selling like hotcakes. Well, fortunately for us, a product like that does exist in the form of the Trimui Brick. Is this a cheaper mini version of the analog pocket that I assume everybody craves for? Well, I actually certainly think so. Let's review this awesome little device, the Trimui Brick. Right off the bat, if you're looking into the Trim UI Brick, you're probably attracted to the look and the feel of the device. As a vertical handheld, it keeps that Game Boy form factor intact, but compacts the build into a device that can easily fit into any pant pocket. While the built material is plastic, I'd easily claim that it's one of the most solid feeling plastic handhelds I've ever owned. Before the brick, if you asked me, say, what I would recommend for a handheld to play GBA titles, I'd have easily gone with the Miu Mini and their successors, those lines. Now, with the Trim UI brick, I would be more inclined to lean towards the brick as the clear consensus best mini handheld. The brick just feels so much nicer in terms of build material than most of its competitors. There's a difference though between feeling great due to the built material and ergonomically comfortable to hold though. I don't necessarily believe that the brick is the latter. While I appreciated the ABS plastic built material and how they make the brick feel more premium than the price point would suggest, the form factor still isn't all that comfortable to hold for long periods of time, if I'm being honest. A vertical Game Boy style console has never been ideal for the way our human hands mount onto a device. That's even more true the more narrow a device gets as it shrinks in its body size. With flat edges and flat surfaces all around, there's no reasonable area to grip the handheld confidently. I've been spoiled playing on the Mod Retro Chromatic, where there are subtle curves to accommodate the natural curvature of the human fingers, and that helps make the grip so much more comfortable than a device like this brick. It really is just a brick. Trim UI added some RGB flair to the brick's design with a light strip across the top of the frame. The RGB is completed with a set of select buttons that are illuminated on the front of the console. This definitely adds a gamer aura around the brick that a lot of its competitors don't actually have. It's an identity that makes this Trim UI offering stand out a lot, and that is a good thing. Smaller body doesn't necessarily mean everything else is lesser, though. The brick houses a 3.2-inch 1024 by 768p IPS display and a 4 by 3 aspect ratio. If the math adds up, right, that's a pixel density of over 400 ppi, which makes the brick incredibly sharp to look at. The brick screen is a delight to look at. It really is. The bezels are minimal so that the screen feels vast for my eyes to watch content on. In this case, it's gaming. Colors are vibrant and they're accented by the high brightness that the IPS screen reaches. Everything just pops off the screen, and the brick gives games from the early Game Boy era new life. It really does. The viewing angles are terrific for such a tight viewing space, but I did find my eyes straining for games that have a lot of reading required. RPGs, definitely. That's more noticeable to me coming from a larger device like an analog pocket. So, if you are used to using smaller devices, this might not be a big deal. Speaking of Game Boy, the original Game Boy and Game Boy Color utilized a 1:1 aspect ratio. The Game Boy Advance, though, moved to a 3:2 aspect ratio to make its image a wider departure from its previous generations. This means that the 4:3 aspect ratio of the brick gives enough flexibility to make all three systems look relatively cleanly formatted, I would say. GBA will have black bezels on the vertical spectrum, while GB and the GBC will use black bars on the horizontal scale. The button layout, though, is standard with a D pad, four face buttons, start, select, the shoulder buttons L and R, as well as many versions of the L2, R2 buttons that aren't really functional, in my opinion. The buttons themselves are clicky and responsive, though the D pad can feel a bit small for those of us with larger hands. Mine aren't too big, so they work well, but it is a small console. That means the button layout is ideal for retro systems in the classic 8-bit and 16-bit eras like Game Boys, NES, SNES, and stuff like Sega Genesis. Like other vertical compact retro handhelds, I don't find the shoulder buttons L and R1 to be comfortable to rest your index fingers on. They feel unnatural to press as they're located higher up than the natural placement of those fingers that where you would think that they should be located. Most classic games don't require L1 and R1, so that isn't an issue, but some GBA titles do utilize the shoulder triggers, and I don't really enjoy holding the brick for prolonged periods of time playing those because of this. There's also the fact that only the L1 and R1 are relatively normal sized, with the secondary L2 and R2 shoulder buttons the size of my pinky. If you're playing PS1 games that need extra buttons on the DualShock controller emulation, the brick isn't the best way to handle that, and you really won't be finding an enjoyable experience with this here. Speaking of the PS1, I found most of the PlayStation games to be considered playable with the occasional frame skipping. Everything before PS1, like GBA, SNES, Game Gear, etc., should run almost flawlessly on this ARM based all winner A133P CPU. With 1 gig of RAM, 8 gigabytes of storage, and of course, micro SD card support, this package does give, I would say, smooth performance to classic 2D games based on my testing. It's all relatively packaged nicely through RetroArch, of course, and the brick just feels familiar if you're used to retro handhelds in recent years. There's nothing extra or significantly better than the other offerings in this segment when it comes to gaming performance, and I actually think that's just fine. For sub $100, this is meant to be a nice feeling Game Boy that can be pocketed and brought along for the ride anywhere and anytime. Still, while the brick isn't a powerhouse for 3D retro consoles, it actually can play a few titles relatively well from, say, N64 and even the PSP libraries. Expect audio crackles and frame drops here and there from some of the games, while others that you probably didn't expect to play too well, like Super Smash Bros., actually runs decently on the brick. Like I said before, if you want something further along in the history of retro gaming, 3D games that is, there are better options out there that aren't too much more expensive than the brick. This is more of a show pony to pull out that it can stretch the limitations of its hardware when needed to show off. Another reason why the brick is really only good for 2D gaming is due to the lack of an analog stick. Even if a game runs acceptably, like, say, The Third Birthday on the PSP, it's almost unplayable without access to an analog stick, as that game and a lot of games like that requires a D-pad to operate the camera controls while you move the character around on the analog stick, which this doesn't have. If you are attempting to play 3D games, the brick does begin heating up around the metal backplate pretty quickly. This also makes the battery life take a huge hit compared to, say, Game Boy gameplay. It's quite uncomfortable to touch, but at least it's isolated to the upper area of the backplate, which is receded from the bottom area where your hands are actually resting. One surprising aspect of the brick that I did not expect to find until I got my unit in hand was a section called ports that house PC games that I don't think should be on here. I highly doubt Trimui worked out license deals with developers of, say, Celeste and Stardew Valley to have their games preloaded on the brick. I could be wrong, but I just don't think that's the case. And yet, here they are. Like most of the systems we purchase to review, we like to see what the preloaded cards that come with it include, before we throw on our own micro SD card with our own libraries on them that we own. This is the first time I've ever seen PC ported games on a retro handheld like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Shredder's Revenge actually running off of the hardware and not streaming from another device or PC. I do also want to note that I have purchased these games on various platforms, so I do own copies of them with my own funds outside of my purchase of the brick. I just wanted to make a comment about this because I did find it interesting that the brick does have the power to play some of these ported newer games that don't require a lot of power. There's a 3000 milliamp hour battery crammed into the brick that should get a handful of hours into a game for you. I average about 4 to 5 hours of gameplay during my few months using the Trimui Brick as my dedicated retro handheld. It charges using a USB-C port, which makes it relatively easy to assimilate with all of my other tech devices when traveling. USB-C is great. Other modern amenities that make the brick more than just a conduit to retro gaming are things like access to the Moonlight app. If you don't know what that is, Moonlight is an application that uses an assigned PC you may own to stream games so that you can operate them on whatever screen your app is installed onto. That means in this case, you could use the brick to operate PC games that are powered by your much stronger PC unit. You can also use the brick as a hotspot hub as it has Wi-Fi connectivity, and it can also connect to Bluetooth peripherals. So you have a lot of additional potential uses with this thing. While the Trimui Brick definitely looks the part when it comes to an ideal compact retro handheld, it does have limitations to what it can do. However, it is an amazing little package at a terrific cost. I haven't seen a handheld in this price category feel so satisfying to own from a design level in quite a long time. I'd be lying if I said this was the first device I'd pull out to use, as I do have other preferences, but I certainly love looking at the brick in my case. It's a beautiful device that is extremely serviceable for Game Boy nostalgia, and it deserves all the accolades it's been receiving. Once again, my name is Alex from the Semnautics. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. Let me know what you think of the Trimui Brick, and if you have any other devices you want me to review, always leave a comment below, and I will try to get my hands on them or have some of our contributors check them out. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.